November 25th, 1940. Dawn over California. The wooden aircraft sat on the runway like an impossible dream. Primer grey, unmarked, built from material the experts called obsolete, built by a man they called a fool. Nathaniel Caldwell stood 50 yards away, hands shaking, not from fear, from something else, something that felt like his son's presence. 41 years old, mechanic, widower in all but name. His wife still breathed, but grief had made her a ghost. His son buried 14 months, his heart damaged from stress and sorrow, his career hanging by a thread. And this aircraft, this beautiful, impossible, illegal aircraft, was either salvation or suicide. The test pilot climbed into the cockpit. Engines coughed to life. The roar shook the morning. Nate touched the flight wings in his pocket. David's wings. The last thing they'd removed from his broken body. "This is for you, son," he whispered. The Phantom rolled forward, faster, faster, and then it flew. 2 weeks earlier. Washington, District of Columbia. November 15th, 1940. The War Department procurement boardroom smelled of cigar smoke and old leather. 7 men in military uniforms sat behind a mahogany table that had witnessed 1,000 proposals, approved 100 contracts, and rejected 900 dreams. Nathaniel Caldwell stood before them with calloused hands and greying hair. 41 years old, a mechanic, not an engineer, not a designer, just a man who'd spent 23 years building aircraft with his own 2 hands at Hartwell Aviation in San Diego, California. He held a single folder containing drawings that would either save his career or destroy it. Colonel Raymond Blackwood, 52, War Department's Chief Procurement Officer, lit another cigar and leaned back in his chair. His eyes held the particular contempt that educated men reserve for those who work with their hands. "Mr. Caldwell," Blackwood said, letting smoke curl from his nostrils, "you're proposing we build a combat aircraft from wood, with no defensive armament, using Allison engines we can barely produce enough of for our existing fighters." Nate's throat was dry. "Yes, sir." "Have you lost your mind?" The other officers chuckled. Nate's hands trembled slightly. 23 years, his pension, his family's security, everything rode on this moment. "No, sir," Nate said quietly. "I've lost my son." The room went silent. Nate opened the folder. Inside were technical drawings, yes, but also a photograph. A young man in an Army Air Corps uniform, dark hair, his mother's smile. 24 years old. David Caldwell, killed November 7th, 1939. Training accident near Randolph Field, Texas. Flying a Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. The aircraft went into a spin at 8,000 feet. Too heavy, too slow to recover. He rode it into the ground. Nate's voice didn't break. He'd practiced this, rehearsed it in front of the bathroom mirror while his wife Maggie slept, practicing not crying, practicing staying strong. "That aircraft killed my son because it was built according to established doctrine. Heavy armor, multiple guns, defensive capability. All that weight made it slow, made it unable to escape a spin, made it a coffin with wings." Blackwood set down his cigar. "Mr. Caldwell, we're all sorry for your loss, but grief doesn't qualify you to design military aircraft." "No, sir, but watching pilots die for 23 years does." Nate spread the drawings across the table. A twin-engine aircraft, sleek, no gun turrets interrupting the smooth lines, no heavy armor plates visible in the cross-sections. "This aircraft will fly at 420 miles per hour, faster than any fighter we currently operate. It'll carry a 1,000-pound bomb load 1,500 miles. And it'll do it with a crew of 2, not 10. Built primarily from laminated plywood, produced in dispersed workshops that won't compete with our metal aircraft production." "Preposterous," Blackwood said. "Wood is obsolete. This is modern warfare. Metal aircraft, aluminum-stressed skin. You're proposing we fight Messerschmitts with a wooden toy. I'm proposing we save American lives by outrunning the enemy instead of trying to armor against them. And the lack of defensive guns? An aircraft that can't be caught doesn't need defensive guns, sir. The board members looked at each other. One of them, a younger major, leaned forward with genuine curiosity. The others shook their heads. Blackwood stood. "Mr. Caldwell, this board appreciates your innovative thinking, but we cannot approve an aircraft design that violates every established principle of air combat doctrine. Bomber aircraft require defensive armament, fighter aircraft require armor protection, and modern aircraft require metal construction. Your proposal is rejected." "Sir, if you'd just—" "Furthermore," Blackwood continued, his voice hardening, "I'm directing Hartwell Aviation to cease all work on unauthorized projects and focus on contracted production. Good day, Mr. Caldwell." The meeting lasted 11 minutes. Nate rode the train back to California in silence, watching America pass outside the window. Fields, towns, forests. Somewhere out there, mothers were raising sons who become pilots, sons who die in heavy, slow aircraft built to outdated doctrine. His son's voice echoed in memory. "Dad, when I get my wings, I'm going to fly the fastest thing in the sky." David never got that chance. The train pulled into San Diego 3 days later. Maggie was waiting on the platform. 38 years old, still beautiful despite the grey streaking her dark hair, despite the lines around her eyes that grief had carved. She knew the answer before Nate spoke. "They said no," he told her. She took his hand, squeezed it, said nothing on the drive home to their small house in Pacific Beach. Only when they were inside, door closed, did she finally speak. "Nate, please, let it go." "I can't. You've done everything you could. You tried. David would understand." "David is dead because I didn't try hard enough 23 years ago, because I accepted what the experts told me was right, because I built what they said to build." He walked to the mantel, picked up David's flight wings, the pin still sharp, still bright. "I told him these would keep him safe. I told him the Army builds good aircraft. I lied to him, Maggie." "You didn't know." "I knew. Every mechanic knows. We build them too heavy, too slow. We bolt on guns and armor because doctrine says so. And then we watch the coffins come home." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "So what are you going to do? Defy the War Department? Build it anyway? They'll fire you. We'll lose everything." Nate set down the wings carefully, looked at his wife, saw the fear there, the exhaustion. She'd already lost a son. Now she was terrified of losing her husband too. "I'm going to save the next mother's son," he said quietly, "even if it costs me everything." She left the room. He heard their bedroom door close. Nate stood alone in the silence, holding his son's wings, and made a decision that would change the war. November 7th, 1939. Randolph Field, Texas, 14 months earlier. Nate had been in the assembly hangar when the base commander found him. The look on Colonel Williams' face told him everything before words could. "Mr. Caldwell, there's been an accident." The world tilted. "Your son's aircraft entered a spin during training operations. He didn't recover. I'm very sorry." They took him to the crash site. He insisted. Maggie begged him not to go. He went anyway. The P-40 Warhawk had augured into the ground at 200 miles per hour. Impact crater 12 feet deep. Wreckage scattered across 100 yards. Smell of aviation fuel and burned metal and something else. Something that used to be his son. The investigation report came 3 days later. Nate read it standing in David's empty bedroom, surrounded by model aircraft and flight manuals and dreams that ended in Texas dirt. Aircraft entered spin at 8,000 feet. Pilot attempted recovery procedures. Aircraft mass and control responsiveness insufficient for recovery. Contributing factors: excessive weight from armor plating and ammunition load, insufficient power-to-weight ratio. Time from spin entry to impact, 47 seconds. 47 seconds. David had 47 seconds to know he was dying. 47 seconds fighting controls that couldn't save him. 47 seconds because doctrine said fighters needed armor and guns more than they needed to fly well. Nate stood in that empty bedroom, reading that report, and felt something break inside him. Not just grief, something else. Rage. Purpose. Obsession. "They killed you," he said to the model aircraft on David's desk. P-40 Warhawk, exact model that killed him. "They built you too heavy and called it safe. They gave you armor instead of speed. They killed you with doctrine." He picked up the model, held it, then threw it against the wall, watched it shatter. "Never again," he whispered. "No more mothers get gold stars because of slow aircraft. No more boys die in 47 seconds. I'll build it right if I have to do it alone." Maggie found him there at midnight, surrounded by shattered model, flight manuals spread across the floor. Sketching, always sketching. "Nate, you need to sleep. I need to build an aircraft David would have survived." "You can't bring him back." "No, but I can save the next one." That was the night it started. The obsession, the mission, the thing that would consume 4 years and nearly kill him and ultimately save 10,000 lives. November 7th, 1939. The night a father's grief became an aircraft designer's vision. The next morning, back in the present, Nate went to work at Hartwell Aviation like nothing had happened. The factory sprawled across 15 acres of San Diego Industrial District, 3 massive hangars, machine shops, assembly bays, 1,200 workers building training aircraft under government contract. Honest work? Safe work. The kind of work that wouldn't get you court-martialed. Nate was chief inspector, which meant he had access to everything, every workshop, every tool room, every storage bay, and, critically, every employee record. He spent the morning walking the factory floor, watching the workers, making mental notes. Who had furniture-making experience? Who understood wood lamination? Who could keep a secret? At lunch, he found 6 men eating sandwiches in the shade of Hangar 3. Jack Morrison, 47, master woodworker, built custom furniture before the Depression drove him to factory work. Vincent Torres, 32, former boat builder from San Pedro, understood compound curves and marine-grade lamination. Carl Henderson, 51, piano factory foreman before that factory closed, knew precision wood assembly like few men alive. 3 others, all skilled, all desperate for the Depression to truly end, for steady work, for purpose. Nate sat down among them without invitation. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "how would you like to build something that actually matters?" They looked at him. Jack Morrison spoke first. "Nate, we're building trainers. They matter. They teach boys to fly aircraft that'll get them killed. I want to build the aircraft that'll keep them alive." He showed them sketches, simplified versions of the drawings the War Department had rejected. A wooden fuselage, using lamination techniques these men had spent lifetimes perfecting. A wing structure that would make a piano manufacturer weep with its precision. "Can't be done," Carl said, but his eyes said otherwise. His fingers traced the wing spar design with the touch of a man seeing beauty. "It can," Nate insisted. "Wood can be lighter than aluminum if we build it right. Monocoque construction. The skin itself is structural, no heavy internal framework needed." "The War Department approve this?" Vincent asked. Nate paused. Here was the moment. The line he'd cross or wouldn't. "No," he said. "They rejected it, called it impossible, told me to stop wasting time." "Then we'll get fired for building it," Jack said. "We'll build it at night, on our own time, using scrap materials. If anyone asks, it's a personal project, experimental mock-up for educational purposes." The men exchanged glances. In 1940, jobs were still precious. The Depression's shadow still lingered. Getting fired meant breadlines, meant shame, meant watching your family go hungry. But there was something else in their eyes. The thing that makes a man spend his life mastering a craft. Pride. The deep knowledge that comes from working with your hands, that tells you when something is right, even when experts say it's wrong. Carl Henderson touched the drawings again. "This spar design, it's beautiful, really beautiful." "Help me build it," Nate said. They started that night. Midnight shift. The factory mostly empty, except for the night security guard, old Pete Garrison, who Nate had worked with for 18 years. Pete had lost his own son in the Great War. He understood grief, understood obsession. "Don't care what you're building, Nate," Pete said, looking the other way as Nate and his crew entered the restricted materials bay. "Just don't burn the place down." They worked by flashlight at first. Later, Nate rigged droplights in the back corner of Hangar 2, where the shadows were deepest and the management never walked. The prototype took shape slowly. Too slowly. By day, Nate inspected production aircraft. By night, he became someone different. Not an inspector, a designer, a builder, a man possessed by the ghost of his son and the future ghosts of sons he might save. April 1940. 4 months of midnight construction. The prototype's skeleton emerged from wood and glue and desperation. The fuselage built in 2 halves like a clamshell, using plywood sheets laminated in compound curves around carefully crafted molds. It was beautiful in the way that functional things are beautiful. No wasted material, no unnecessary weight, every piece serving multiple purposes. The skin was structure, structure was skin. But problems emerged. The California heat warped the wood. Carefully laminated panels twisted overnight, ruining days of work. Nate lost weight, stopped sleeping, felt his heart pound irregularly in his chest when he climbed the ladder to inspect the upper fuselage sections. Maggie noticed. "You're killing yourself," she said one morning, watching him drink coffee with trembling hands. "Look at you. You're 41 years old. You have angina. The doctor said stress would kill you." The doctor also said David's aircraft was safe. "Nate, I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're obsessed. You work all day, build all night, and you barely speak to me anymore. I've lost my son. I can't lose my husband too." She was right. He knew she was right. The chest pains were getting worse, the trembling hands, the shortness of breath. His body was failing even as the aircraft took shape. But he couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. David's voice in his memory. "Dad, when I get my wings..." May 1940 brought an unexpected visitor. Nate was alone in Hangar 2 at 2 in the morning, adjusting the climate controls he had jury-rigged to prevent wood warping, when he heard footsteps behind him. He spun around, heart hammering, expecting security, expecting management, expecting the end. Instead, he found a man in a civilian suit, late 40s, greying hair, sharp eyes that took in the wooden prototype with an engineer's understanding. "Mr. Caldwell," the man said, "I'm Major General Sterling Whitmore. I need to talk to you about your aircraft." Nate's mouth went dry. A general, in his factory, at 2 in the morning. This was either salvation or court-martial. "Sir, I can explain." "Don't. I know exactly what you're doing, and I know why." Whitmore walked around the prototype slowly, hands behind his back, touched the fuselage skin, examined the wing root junction, nodded to himself. "My nephew," he said quietly, "was Lieutenant Peter Whitmore, B-17 co-pilot, shot down over the English Channel 6 weeks ago. The aircraft was too slow to evade the Me-109s, too heavy to climb above them. Peter's crew fought bravely, used every defensive gun they had. It didn't matter." He turned to face Nate. They stood in silence, 2 men bound by loss. "How did he die?" Nate asked finally. "Your nephew?" Whitmore was quiet for long moments, then, "Peter was co-pilot on a B-17, channel crossing. They encountered Me-109s. The bomber had 6 defensive guns, armor plating, everything doctrine says keeps you safe." He touched the Phantom's wooden skin. "The Germans didn't even dogfight, just made slashing passes. The B-17 was too slow to evade, too heavy to climb. Peter's crew used every gun they had. Didn't matter. Agility would have saved them. Speed they didn't have because we loaded them with weight." "How long?" Nate asked. "From first contact to?" 12 minutes. They fought for 12 minutes. Burning, falling. 12 minutes to know they were dying. Nate closed his eyes. David had 47 seconds. 47? His aircraft was in a spin. He had 47 seconds to recover. Couldn't. Too heavy. Too slow. 47 seconds watching the ground coming. Whitmore's jaw tightened. I read the report. Contributing factors, excessive weight. Like it was weather. Like it was just bad luck. It wasn't luck. It was doctrine. Same doctrine that killed Peter. Which is why I'm here, Mr. Caldwell. I can't bring Peter back. But I can help you build the aircraft that might have saved him. Might save the next Peter. The next David. From his briefcase, Whitmore produced authorization forms, funding codes, material requisitions. I have a discretionary budget for experimental development. It's not much, but it's enough. I'm authorizing you to purchase materials, hire additional workers, and complete this prototype. Officially, this is a research project into alternative construction methods. Unofficially, you're building the aircraft that should have been built years ago. Nate stared at the papers. His hands were shaking again, but not from angina, from hope. Dangerous, terrifying hope. Sir, if this fails, then we both face court-martial. I'm aware. But Mr. Caldwell, I watched them fold my nephew's flag and hand it to his mother. Your son, my nephew. How many more boys die before someone has the courage to break the rules? He held out his hand. Partners? Nate took it. Partners. Though for the record, Whitmore added, if this fails, we're both going to prison. Then we better not fail. They didn't shake hands like businessmen making a deal. They gripped like men making a vow, like brothers joining a war, like fathers refusing to let their sons die for nothing. That handshake changed everything. He handed Nate a pen. Nate signed. The work accelerated. With proper funding, Nate hired 12 additional craftsmen, furniture makers from San Diego's struggling home industry, boat builders from the waterfront who understood marine lamination, piano factory workers who could achieve tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. They worked in shifts now. Not just midnight, around the clock. The prototype grew from skeleton to skin to something that looked like it might actually fly. The fuselage, built in 2 halves, joined along the vertical centerline. Plywood sheets in multiple layers, each layer's grain running perpendicular to the last, creating composite strength that exceeded aluminium pound for pound. The joint line, invisible when properly finished. A monocoque structure where every square inch of skin carried structural load. The wings presented the greatest challenge. Conventional aircraft used metal spars with fabric covering. Nate's design used wooden spars with plywood skin, the entire wing forming a torsion box that would twist and flex under load without breaking. The mathematics were complex. The execution required precision that made grown men weep. Carl Henderson became the wing specialist. His piano factory experience translated perfectly to wing rib construction. Each rib identical to within 0.05 of an inch. Each joint perfect. Each glue line stronger than the wood itself. It's beautiful, Carl said one night, running his hands over the nearly complete port wing. I've built pianos for Carnegie Hall. This is more beautiful. But beauty wasn't enough. The aircraft needed to fly. And to fly, it needed engines. Allison V1710 engines. 12-cylinder, liquid-cooled power plants producing over 1,000 horsepower each. The same engines that powered P-40 Warhawks. The same engines that were in desperately short supply. Getting 2 engines was impossible through normal channels. The War Department allocated every available Allison to contracted fighters. Experimental projects got nothing. But Sterling Whitmore had connections that Nate didn't. In August 1940, 2 engines arrived at Hartwell Aviation, officially designated as test units for evaluation purposes, officially temporary, officially due to be returned after testing. Unofficially, they were Nate's to keep. Whitmore had burned favors and bent regulations and put his entire career at risk for engines that might power an aircraft that might prove a theory that might save lives. They mounted the engines in October. The prototype, now nearly complete, sat on its landing gear in the back corner of Hangar 2. Smooth wooden skin covered with fabric and dope, painted in primer gray. No markings, no designation, just a serial number Nate had made up. HC-001. Hartwell Caldwell 001. It didn't look like any aircraft in American service. The nose was glazed glass, providing the crew exceptional visibility. No gun turrets interrupted the sleek fuselage lines. The engines were mounted on the wings in streamlined nacelles that minimized drag. Every surface smooth, every rivet flush, every line purposeful. Standing before it in the hangar's dim light, Nate felt his son's presence, felt David's approval, felt the weight of every promise he'd made at that grave. "We're ready for engine runs," Jack Morrison told him. Nate's chest tightened. Not angina this time. Fear. What if it didn't work? What if the experts were right and he was wrong? What if he'd wasted months and Whitmore's career and his own family's security on a beautiful failure? "Tomorrow," Nate said. "First light. We'll know tomorrow." That night he couldn't sleep. Lay in bed next to Maggie, listening to her breathe, feeling his heart race. She woke around 3, found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at David's flight wings in the dim light. "Tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow." She sat down across from him, took his hands, looked into his eyes. "Nate, whatever happens tomorrow, you've already proven something. You've proven that love matters more than doctrine, that a father's grief can build something beautiful, that ordinary men can do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept that the experts know everything. What if it fails? Then you tried. David would be proud of that. I'm proud of that." He squeezed her hands, felt tears he'd been holding back for months finally fall. "I miss him so much," he whispered. "I know. So do I. But Nate, he's not coming back, and you can't bring him back by killing yourself building this aircraft. If it works, wonderful. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But either way, I need you to come back to me. I need my husband back." In the darkness of their kitchen, while America slept and war raged across the Atlantic, Nathaniel Caldwell made another promise. Not to ghosts this time, to the living. "When this is done," he said, "I'll come back. I promise." November 25th, 1940. 1 year and 18 days after David's death. 1 year to the day since Nate stood before the War Department board and heard them say, no. The prototype sat on Hartwell Aviation's auxiliary runway at dawn. Grey primer, unmarked, illegal, beautiful. Sterling Whitmore stood beside Nate. Conrad Hartwell, the company founder, had arrived despite the early hour. The construction crew, 24 men who'd worked midnight shifts for months, stood at a respectful distance. The test pilot was a company man named Frank Morrison, Jack Morrison's younger brother, 34 years old, 5,000 flight hours, enough experience to know when an aircraft was dangerous, and enough courage to fly it anyway. Frank walked around the aircraft slowly, checking control surfaces, looking for anything that might kill him. Found nothing. The craftsman had built it too well. He looked at Nate. "She's beautiful. What do I call her?" Nate paused. He'd been calling it the prototype, the project, the aircraft. Never thought about a name. "Phantom," he said suddenly. The word came from somewhere deep. "Because she's fast enough to disappear. Because she's built from wood that everyone says is obsolete, a ghost of the past. Because she's here for one reason, to haunt the aircraft that killed my son." Frank nodded, climbed into the cockpit. The Allison engines coughed to life. 12 cylinders per engine, 24 total, igniting in sequence with a roar that rattled hangar windows half a mile away. Blue smoke from the exhaust, the smell of high-octane aviation fuel, the feeling that the world was about to change. Frank ran through his checklist. Oil pressure good, manifold pressure good, controls free and functioning, engine temperatures rising into the green. He looked at Nate through the glazed nose, gave a thumbs up, released the brakes. The Phantom rolled forward, picking up speed, the wooden structure flexing exactly as designed, the engines pulling it faster, faster, the tail coming up, and then it was flying. But wrong. Something was wrong. The nose pitched up sharply, too sharply. The aircraft was too light, too responsive. Frank fought the controls, correcting, over-correcting. The Phantom wallowing in the air like a drunk man learning to walk. On the ground, Nate's heart stopped. This was it. The moment of catastrophic failure. The moment the experts would point to and say, "See? Wood doesn't work. Unconventional thinking kills pilots. Mechanics should stay in their lane. But Frank Morrison had 5,000 hours for a reason. He knew aircraft, knew how they wanted to fly. He reduced power slightly, trimmed the elevators, let the Phantom tell him what it needed. And then it stopped fighting, started flying. Frank's voice crackled over the radio, calm and professional. "Nate, she was just too light on the controls, needed gentle hands. I'm climbing to altitude for speed runs." The Phantom climbed like nothing Nate had ever seen, straight up, engines screaming, wooden airframe slicing through California morning air like it was born to do this. At 10,000 feet, Frank leveled off, pushed the throttles forward. The ground crew watched through binoculars, watched the Phantom accelerate, watched it pull away from its own sound, watched it become the thing Nate had promised it would be. Frank's voice again, professional calm cracking slightly, excitement bleeding through. "Nate, I'm showing 418 miles per hour indicated. 418. She's faster than any fighter we've got, faster than the P-51 prototype. This isn't an experimental aircraft, this is a war winner." On the ground, Nate's knees went weak. Maggie, who'd come despite saying she wouldn't, caught his arm, kept him standing. 23 years of building other people's designs. 1 year of grief. Months of midnight construction. Weeks of stress-induced angina. Days of doubt. 418 miles per hour. David's voice in memory one last time. "Dad, when I get my wings, I'm going to fly the fastest thing in the sky." "You are, son," Nate thought, watching the Phantom bank and turn against the blue California sky. "You finally are." The Phantom landed 47 minutes later, touched down smooth, rolled to a stop. Frank shut down the engines and climbed out with a grin that could light cities. "That," he said, "was the most amazing aircraft I've ever flown. Bar none." The construction crew erupted in cheers. Men who'd worked for months without pay, without recognition, without knowing if their work would matter, finally seeing vindication. Sterling Whitmore shook Nate's hand, his grip firm. "You did it. Now comes the hard part." "What hard part?" "We proved it works. Now you have to convince the War Department to admit they were wrong, because impressive test flights weren't enough. The prototype proved the concept, but the concept violated doctrine, threatened careers, challenged the established order that said mechanics don't design aircraft and wood doesn't belong in modern warfare. In December 1940, Sterling Whitmore arranged for War Department observers to witness demonstration flights. They came reluctantly, watched the Phantom fly circles around their assumptions, saw the speed, saw the maneuverability, saw wood outperforming metal, and remained unconvinced. Colonel Raymond Blackwood filed his report. While the Hartwell experimental aircraft demonstrates interesting performance characteristics, it remains unsuitable for military service. Combat operations require defensive armament. Wooden construction cannot withstand battle damage. The design violates established procurement guidelines, not recommended for production. Nate read the report in Whitmore's office. Read it 3 times, hoping the words would change. They didn't. "They're going to kill it," Nate said quietly. "Worse, they're going to investigate how it got built in the first place. How you got funding, how you got engines, where the materials came from. Investigation means court-martial for both of us, possibly prison for misappropriation of military resources." Nate sat down heavily. Outside the window, the Phantom sat on the tarmac, afternoon sun gleaming off its wooden skin. Beautiful, functional, illegal. He thought about Maggie, about the promise he'd made in their kitchen, about coming back to her. "I'm sorry," he told Whitmore. "I've destroyed your career." "No, we haven't lost yet. There's one more option, but it's a long shot." "What option?" "We take this to Congress, make it public, force them to choose between doctrine and results." It was insane, taking on the War Department directly, challenging military authority in front of the American people. The kind of thing that ended careers, destroyed reputations, made examples of men who thought they could fight the system. But what choice remained? Let the Phantom die? Let David's death mean nothing? Let future pilots die in aircraft built to outdated specifications because no one had the courage to challenge tradition? Nate looked at the Phantom through the window one more time, then back at Sterling Whitmore. When do we testify? 2 weeks. Congressional Subcommittee on Military Preparedness. They're already interested because of the media coverage. Old mechanic builds wooden aircraft. Human interest angle. But Nate, they'll crucify you. They'll dig into every decision, every dollar spent, every regulation bent. You could face prison. I know. And you're willing to risk it? Nate stood, walked to the window, pressed his hand against the glass, feeling the cool smoothness, thinking about another smooth surface. The coffin that held his son, the flag they'd folded and handed to Maggie, the silence of the funeral, the empty chair at their table. My son died because experts built aircraft to doctrine instead of reality. If I go to prison fighting that doctrine, at least I'll go knowing I tried to save the next boy. That's worth everything. He turned to face Whitmore. Let's go to war. December 9th, 1940. The Congressional Subcommittee hearing room in Washington held 200 spectators, 20 journalists, and one mechanic who couldn't stop his hands from shaking. Nathaniel Caldwell sat at the witness table wearing his only suit, 41 years old but looking older, grey hair thinning, face lined with exhaustion. The angina medication made him slightly nauseous, but he'd taken it anyway because stress made his heart race and he couldn't afford to collapse here. Not now, not when everything depended on the next few hours. Maggie sat in the front row. She'd insisted on coming despite his protests, wore her Sunday dress, held David's flight wings in her lap like a talisman. Across the aisle sat Colonel Raymond Blackwood and 6 War Department officials. They looked confident, comfortable. They had institutional power, established doctrine, and the full weight of military bureaucracy behind them. Nate had drawings and the truth. The committee chairman, Senator Howard Mitchell from Ohio, gavelled the hearing to order. This committee convenes to examine allegations of unauthorized use of military resources at Hartwell Aviation, San Diego, California. Mr. Caldwell, you understand you're under oath? Yes, sir. Please state your full name and occupation for the record. Nathaniel Thomas Caldwell, Chief Inspector, Hartwell Aviation, 23 years. And you are accused of misappropriating military materials, using unauthorized funding, and building an experimental aircraft without proper War Department approval. How do you plead? The word plead hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't just an investigation. This was a trial. They wanted him to beg, to admit wrongdoing, to validate their authority. Nate looked at Maggie. She nodded slightly. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small leather case, opened it. David's flight wings caught the overhead lights. Senator, before I answer, I'd like to show you something. Mr. Caldwell, that's not... Lieutenant David Nathaniel Caldwell, Army Air Corps, 24 years old, killed November 7th, 1939, when his P-40 Warhawk entered an unrecoverable spin during training operations. The aircraft was too heavy, too slow, built to specifications that prioritized armor and armament over performance. My son rode that aircraft into the ground because doctrine said it needed to be tough instead of fast. He set the wings on the table. The metallic click echoed in the silent room. I'm not here to plead guilty or innocent, Senator. I'm here to plead for the lives of other men's sons, because if we keep building aircraft to outdated doctrine, more mothers will receive folded flags, more fathers will bury their children, more boys will die, not from enemy action, but from our own refusal to admit we might be wrong. Senator Mitchell's expression softened slightly. Mr. Caldwell, we're all sympathetic to your loss, but personal tragedy doesn't authorize you to violate military regulations. No, sir, but 23 years of watching those regulations kill pilots does authorize me to question them. Blackwood stood abruptly. Mr. Chairman, the witness is being argumentative and evasive. I move we... Sit down, Colonel, Mitchell said sharply. Mr. Caldwell, continue. Nate pulled out the drawings, the same ones the War Department had rejected 13 months ago, spread them across the table where the senators could see. This is what I built. Twin-engine aircraft, wooden construction, no defensive armament, top speed 418 miles per hour. That's 50 miles per hour faster than our fastest fighter, faster than anything Germany has except experimental jets. And it's built from wood, non-strategic material that doesn't compete with our metal aircraft production. A senator from California, Daniel Hawkins, leaned forward. You're saying this wooden aircraft outperforms our metal fighters? Yes, sir. We've conducted over 40 test flights. The aircraft exceeds every performance metric except one. It has no defensive guns. But it doesn't need them because it can outrun any threat. That's heresy, Blackwood interjected. Established doctrine requires. Doctrine, Nate interrupted, his voice rising for the first time, got my son killed. Doctrine says build them heavy and tough. Doctrine says more guns equal more survival. Doctrine is wrong, Colonel. The room erupted, journalists scribbling, spectators murmuring, Blackwood on his feet, shouting about insubordination and contempt. Senator Mitchell gavelled for order. Gentlemen, Mr. Caldwell, you will moderate your tone. Colonel Blackwood, you will be seated. This is a hearing, not a street brawl. Nate forced himself to breathe slowly. His heart hammered against his ribs. The medication wasn't working. Stress was overwhelming chemistry. He felt dizzy. Maggie stood halfway. He shook his head, sat back. He had to finish this. Senator, he said quietly, I apologize for my outburst, but I'm not a designer. I'm not an engineer. I'm a mechanic who spent 23 years building what other people design. And in those 23 years, I've watched doctrine evolve toward heavier aircraft with more guns and more armor. And I've watched loss rates increase. Our bombers are shot down because they're too slow to escape fighters. Our fighters are shot down because they're too heavy to climb above interceptors. We're losing a war of physics while debating doctrine. Senator Hawkins studied the drawings. This design uses Allison engines. Where did you obtain them? Here was the dangerous part, the part that could send Sterling Whitmore to prison. I was provided access to test engines through proper military channels, sir. What channels? Silence. Nate knew he should name Whitmore, should spread the blame, should protect himself. But Whitmore had lost a nephew, had taken a risk, had believed when everyone else mocked. I prefer not to say, Senator. The responsibility is mine. Mr. Caldwell, if you don't identify your source, I'll hold you in contempt. From the back of the room, a voice rang out. I authorize the engines, Senator. Everyone turned. Major General Sterling Whitmore walked down the center aisle in full dress uniform. Medals from the Great War glinting, face set in determined lines. General Whitmore, Senator Mitchell said slowly, you're aware this is a civilian hearing. Military personnel are not compelled to testify. I'm aware, sir, but I won't let Mr. Caldwell take sole responsibility for a decision we made together. He took the empty chair beside Nate, faced the committee. I provided Mr. Caldwell with discretionary development funding and authorized the temporary loan of 2 Allison engines for experimental evaluation. I did so because I believe, as he does, that our current aircraft doctrine is flawed and is costing American lives. General, that's a serious allegation, Blackwood said. You're accusing the War Department of... I'm accusing no one, Colonel. I'm stating facts. My nephew, Lieutenant Peter Whitmore, was killed 6 months ago flying a B-17 over the Channel. The aircraft was intercepted by Me-109s. Despite multiple defensive guns and heavy armor, the entire crew perished. They had 12 minutes to know they were dying, 12 minutes burning and falling because the aircraft was too slow to escape. Mr. Caldwell's design provides the capability that might have saved them. Senator Hawkins looked between them. So we have a general and a mechanic conducting unauthorized aircraft development, using military resources, without proper oversight. Gentlemen, do you understand how this looks? Yes, sir, Whitmore said. It looks like 2 men who've lost family members to preventable deaths decided to prevent future deaths, regardless of personal cost. It looks like insubordination and misappropriation. Perhaps, but it also looks like an aircraft that flies faster than anything we currently operate, built from non-strategic materials, capable of missions our current aircraft cannot perform. Sometimes, Senator, the greatest breakthroughs come from people who care more about results than regulations. Senator Mitchell leaned back. Mr. Caldwell, did you or did you not use unauthorized military funding? Nate looked at Maggie. She nodded slightly. I did. Gasps from the gallery. Did you or did you not commandeer military-allocated engines? I did. Did you or did you not build this aircraft, knowing it violated War Department regulations? Yes, sir. Blackwood smiled. He had his confession. And, Nate continued, his voice strengthening, I'd do it again. The smile vanished. Because my son is dead, Senator. Lieutenant David Caldwell, 24 years old, killed in an aircraft built to your regulations, your doctrine, your approved specifications. This is what the Army gave me after they killed my son. He touched the wings on the table. Folded flag, flight wings, certificate of valor. Very pretty. Doesn't bring him back. Mr. Caldwell. David's aircraft entered a spin at 8,000 feet. He had 47 seconds to recover. Couldn't. The aircraft was too heavy to respond. 47 seconds, Senator, watching the ground coming, knowing he was dead, because of regulations. The room was silent. So yes, I violated regulations. I used unauthorized funding. I built an aircraft your experts said was impossible. And you know what? It flies at 418 miles per hour, faster than anything we have. And it's built from wood, material that doesn't compete with our metal production. He stood, leaning on the table. You want to court-martial me? Fine, send me to prison. But first, explain to American mothers why their sons will die in slow aircraft, because I'm in jail. Explain why doctrine matters more than lives. Explain why following regulations is more important than winning the war we're about to enter. Senator Hawkins spoke for the first time. Mr. Caldwell, you're asking us to approve an aircraft that violates I'm asking you to approve an aircraft that works. That saves lives, that brings boys home to their mothers. I don't care if it violates doctrine. Doctrine killed my son. I'm trying to save yours. The silence stretched. Then from the gallery someone started clapping. A woman, middle-aged. Her son was a pilot. Another person joined, then another. Within seconds, half the gallery was applauding. Mitchell gavelled for order. This hearing will maintain decorum. But the damage was done, or the victory, depending on perspective. Blackwood had his confession, but Nate had won the room. The hearing lasted 6 hours. They called witnesses. Test pilots who'd flown the Phantom testified to its exceptional performance. Engineers explained the wooden construction techniques. Conrad Hartwell testified that the project had used minimal company resources and caused no disruption to contracted production. Blackwood called his own witnesses. Procurement officers who testified about the importance of following established procedures. Design engineers who questioned whether wooden construction could withstand combat damage. Doctrine specialists who explained why defensive armament was essential. The sun was setting when Senator Mitchell finally gavelled the proceedings to a close. This committee will deliberate and issue findings within 2 weeks. Until then, all work on the experimental aircraft will cease. Mr. Caldwell, General Whitmore, you are both relieved of duties pending final determination. This hearing is adjourned. Nate and Whitmore walked out together into the December cold. Maggie joined them, taking Nate's arm. Well, Whitmore said quietly, we did our best. Will they approve production? Maggie asked. More likely they'll court-martial us both. But Nate wasn't listening. He was watching journalists clustered around the courthouse steps, writing frantically. He saw one headline being drafted. Mechanic challenges War Department. Wooden aircraft faster than metal fighters. The newspapers, he said. Whitmore followed his gaze, understood immediately. Public opinion. If the people care, Congress has to care. And the people cared. The story ran in 50 newspapers the next day. Human interest angle. Grieving father builds aircraft to save other father's sons. War Department tries to stop him. David versus Goliath. America loved nothing more than an underdog fighting bureaucracy. Letters poured into congressional offices. Mothers whose sons were pilots. Fathers who'd served in the Great War. Veterans who understood that innovation, not tradition, won wars. 2 weeks later, Congress issued its ruling. Nate was in San Diego when the telegram arrived, working in his garage because he'd been suspended from Hartwell Aviation, pending the investigation's outcome. Building a wooden chair because his hands needed to work, needed to create something, anything, to keep the anxiety at bay. Maggie brought in the telegram at dusk. He opened it with hands that shook worse than they had in the hearing room. Congressional Committee findings, : no criminal wrongdoing, stop. Experimental development, approved for limited production, stop. 10 reconnaissance variants, authorized for operational evaluation, stop. Combat variants remain unauthorized, pending further review, stop. 10 aircraft, not thousands, not even hundreds, 10 reconnaissance planes. But it was something, a crack in the wall of doctrine. Nate read it 3 times, then looked at Maggie. They said yes. They said yes to 10 planes, Nate. That's not... It's enough. 10 planes to prove the concept. 10 planes that'll fly faster than anything else. 10 planes that'll come home when others don't. It's enough to show them I'm right. She hugged him, felt how thin he'd become, how his heart raced against her cheek, how the stress had aged him years in months. Promise me something, she whispered. Anything. When those 10 planes are built, you'll rest, you'll stop, you'll let someone else fight this war. He promised, meant it. But promises made in relief often break under renewed pressure. Production began in February 1941. 10 Phantom reconnaissance variants. No armament, just cameras and speed. Built in Hartwell Aviation's back hangar by the same crew that had constructed the prototype. Jack Morrison, Vincent Torres, Carl Henderson, and the others working now with proper funding, proper materials, proper authorization. But Nate couldn't let it go. Couldn't just build what Congress authorized. He supervised every step, inspected every joint, drove himself and his crew toward perfection, because anything less meant pilots might die, and doctrine advocates might say, "See? Wood doesn't work. Unconventional thinking kills." His health deteriorated. The angina episodes increased. Twice, Maggie found him unconscious in his workshop, having worked through chest pain until his body forced him to stop. The doctor was blunt. "Mr. Caldwell, you're having minor heart attacks. The next one might not be minor. You need to reduce stress, reduce hours, reduce obsession. Or you'll die within the year. I'll rest when the planes are finished. They'll finish you first." But the Phantoms took shape. Beautiful wooden aircraft painted in reconnaissance grey, camera ports where gun turrets would normally be, every surface smooth, every joint perfect. 10 aircraft built to standards that exceeded military specifications because Nate Caldwell couldn't accept good enough when lives depended on perfect. July 1941. The first Phantom reconnaissance aircraft entered operational service with the Army Air Corps Photo Reconnaissance Unit. Lieutenant Owen Fletcher, 27 years old, from a small town in Nebraska, flew the first combat evaluation mission. High-altitude photography of suspected Japanese installations in the Pacific. The mission profile called for flying deep into potentially hostile airspace, taking photographs and returning before enemy fighters could intercept. Fletcher climbed into the Phantom at dawn. 27 years old, Nebraska farm boy, 500 flight hours, scared absolutely shitless. The cockpit was different, wooden structure visible through the paint, lightweight controls, camera port where guns should be. Everything about this aircraft violated what they'd taught him. "She's fast," the crew chief said. "Faster than anything else, just don't try to dogfight." "What do I do if intercepted?" The crew chief grinned, pushed the throttles forward and watched them disappear. Fletcher started engines. Twin Allisons roared. The aircraft felt alive, eager. Like a racehorse in the gate, Tower cleared him. He advanced throttles. The Phantom leapt forward, not rolled, leapt. Within seconds he was airborne. Within a minute he was at 10,000 feet. "Jesus," he breathed. He leveled at 22,000, cruised at 405 miles per hour. The world blurred beneath him. Nebraska farms he'd flown over at 200 miles per hour now streaked past like chalk lines. 30 minutes to target. Japanese installation on an island that conventional reconnaissance couldn't reach. Too far, too well defended. Fletcher found it easily. No clouds, perfect visibility. Started his photo run. That's when the Zero appeared. Japanese fighter, Mitsubishi A6M, fast, maneuverable, armed with cannons and machine guns. Fletcher had cameras. The Zero pilot saw him, turned in, diving attack. Every instinct Fletcher had screamed, "Turn! Evade! Fight!" But the crew chief's words, "Don't dogfight, just throttle." Fletcher pushed both throttles to the wall. The Phantom accelerated like it had been kicked. 405, 415, 425, 430. He glanced back. The Zero was falling behind, not slowly, rapidly, like it was going backward. 435 miles per hour. The Zero gave up, turned away, couldn't even try to chase. Fletcher completed his photo run, 20 perfect images, turned for home. On the flight back, cruising at 400 miles per hour, he thought about Mr. Caldwell, the mechanic who'd built this impossible aircraft, the father who'd lost his son. And Fletcher realized that man's son had just saved his life. When he landed, he wrote 2 reports, the official one for Army Air Corps and a personal one. His official report read like vindication. Aircraft performance exceeds all expectations. Cruised at 405 miles per hour at 22,000 feet. Japanese fighters attempted interception but could not match speed or altitude. Photography completed with 0 defensive engagement. No damage sustained. Recommend immediate expansion of reconnaissance program. The personal letter went to San Diego. Mr. Caldwell, I wanted to tell you that your son saved my life today. I know that sounds strange since I never met Lieutenant Caldwell, but the aircraft you built in his memory kept me alive when conventional wisdom said I needed guns and armor. A Japanese Zero found me over the Pacific. In any other reconnaissance aircraft, I'd be dead. Instead, I pushed the throttles forward and watched him disappear. Your Phantom didn't just outrun him, it left him so far behind, he quit trying. I came home to my wife and daughter because a father who lost his son refused to let other fathers lose theirs. Thank you. Lieutenant Owen Fletcher, Nebraska. Nate received the official report through channels, received Fletcher's personal letter 3 days later. He read the letter in his workshop at midnight, alone, crying for the first time since David's funeral. Not from grief this time, from something else, something that felt almost like redemption. The 10 reconnaissance Phantoms flew 153 missions over the next 6 months. Deep penetration photography over hostile territory. Missions that conventional aircraft couldn't complete without heavy losses. The statistics told their own story. 153 missions. 0 losses to enemy action. 2 aircraft damaged by mechanical failures, both returned safely. A loss rate of 0% compared to 15 to 20% for conventional reconnaissance aircraft. But the War Department still refused to authorize combat variants. Reconnaissance is one thing, Colonel Blackwood wrote in his evaluation. Combat requires armament and armor. The committee's findings stand. No authorization for fighter or bomber variants. December 7, 1941. Changed everything. Pearl Harbor. Japanese surprise attack. The Pacific Fleet crippled. America at war. Suddenly, doctrine mattered less than survival. Suddenly, conventional thinking gave way to desperate innovation. Suddenly, the War Department needed aircraft immediately, and 10 Phantoms with perfect operational records looked very appealing. But still no combat authorization, just orders for 50 more reconnaissance variants, proof that bureaucracy moves slowly, even during catastrophe. Nate stood in his workshop the day after Pearl Harbor, listening to radio reports of the devastation, listening to casualty counts, listening to America's shock and rage, and he made a decision that would either save thousands of lives or send him to prison. He was going to build combat variants anyway. March 1942, midnight. Furniture factory 60 miles from San Diego. Nate stood before two Phantom reconnaissance aircraft, beautiful wooden warriors, built for cameras, not combat.
"You're serious about this," Jack Morrison said.
Completely. They'll hang you, literally. Unauthorized armament in wartime. Jack, how many boys died today, right now, while we talk? I don't. Hundreds. Hundreds died today. Tomorrow, hundreds more. Next week, thousands. While we wait for authorization that'll never come because Blackwood would rather lose the war than admit a mechanic was right. Nate pulled out drawings, gun installations, ammunition feeds, bomb racks. I can save some of them, not all, but some. If I wait for permission, they die waiting. And if you do this without permission, you die hanging. Then I die knowing I tried. Nate looked at Jack. I failed, David. Couldn't save him. But I can save someone else's son, even if it costs everything. Jack studied the drawings. Piano factory precision applied to weapons installation. 4 .50 calibers in the nose, he read. 2 20mm cannons. Jesus, Nate, this isn't reconnaissance.
This is a fighter. It's salvation.
For boys who don't know they need it yet. How long? 3 months. 2 if we work nights. Jack looked at the aircraft, thought about his own nephew, 17, joining the Army Air Corps in June. I've got a nephew, he said quietly. Tommy. Wants to be a pilot. Then help me make sure he survives becoming one. Jack picked up a wrench. 3 months. Let's make it 2. They worked in absolute secrecy. 6 men total, installing gun mounts while the world slept, running ammunition feeds through wooden structure never designed for combat, adding armor where it wouldn't slow the aircraft, removing weight where they could, converting peace into war, hope into weapons. By June, 2 combat Phantoms existed, secret, illegal, perfect. Fletcher volunteered immediately. That aircraft saved my life once. If it can save others, I'm in. Lieutenant James Parker from Ohio signed up next, lost his brother at Pearl Harbor.
Wanted revenge more than safety. They waited for opportunity.
It came in June, when Japanese reconnaissance aircraft had been spotted approaching the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. Intelligence suggested a major raid was imminent. Conventional fighters were scrambled, but the distances were too great. The slow fighters couldn't reach the threatened areas in time. Fletcher and Parker launched without orders, flew their armed Phantoms north at maximum speed, reached the Aleutians hours before conventional fighters, and found 4 Japanese aircraft, 3 Zeros escorting 1 Betty bomber. The combat lasted 4 minutes. Fletcher and Parker dove from altitude, speed advantage overwhelming. The Zeros never had time to maneuver. 4 concentrated guns firing from each Phantom. The Japanese aircraft didn't stand a chance. 3 Zeros destroyed, 1 Betty bomber destroyed. Kill ratio, 4-0. Both Phantoms returned to base without damage.
Both pilots were immediately arrested for unauthorized combat operations.
The court-martial convened within 48 hours. Military justice moves fast during wartime, especially when regulations have been violated. Nate attended every session, sat in the gallery, watching 2 brave men face prison because they'd flown aircraft he'd illegally armed. The prosecution was brutal. Unauthorized weapons installation, unauthorized combat engagement, violation of direct orders. Each charge carried years in military prison. Fletcher and Parker didn't deny anything, accepted full responsibility. But on the 3rd day, something unexpected happened. General Sterling Whitmore entered the courtroom, walked to the prosecution table, set down a folder. Gentlemen, I have evidence that requires this court's immediate attention. Inside the folder, gun camera footage from both Phantoms. The entire engagement recorded. 4 Japanese aircraft destroyed. American territory defended.
All because 2 pilots in wooden aircraft did what conventional fighters couldn't.
The question before this court, Whitmore said, is whether we punish innovation that saves American lives or whether we reward courage that defeats our enemies. These men violated regulations. They also saved Alaska. Perhaps, in wartime, results should matter more than rules. The footage leaked within hours. Newspapers ran stills the next day. "Wooden Wonder saves Alaska," the headlines screamed. Public opinion shifted violently. Families of Alaska residents wrote to Congress. Veterans demanded the pilots be decorated, not imprisoned. The court-martial became a referendum on whether America would let doctrine kill initiative. On June 15, 1942, the military court issued its verdict. Guilty of unauthorized combat operations, sentenced to reprimand and loss of 1 month's pay, immediately returned to duty.
And notably, authorized to continue flying armed Phantom aircraft for combat evaluation purposes. The War Department, bowing to public pressure and combat effectiveness, authorized production of 100 fighter variants and 50 bomber variants. Nate received the news in his workshop. Collapsed. Not from relief, from his heart finally giving out under months of accumulated stress. Maggie found him unconscious, called the ambulance, rode with him to the hospital while he drifted in and out of consciousness. The doctor's diagnosis was clear: severe myocardial infarction, massive heart attack. Nate had pushed his damaged heart past its limits. "He needs complete rest," the doctor told Maggie. "No work, no stress, months of recovery. If he doesn't stop, the next heart attack will kill him." Maggie sat beside his hospital bed, holding his hand, watching him sleep under morphine's influence. When he woke, she told him about the production authorization. "You won," she said. "They're building your aircraft. 150 of them to start. You can rest now." "Can't rest. Need to supervise production. Need to ensure quality." "Nate, you almost died. The doctor says if you don't stop, you will die. Is that what you want? To kill yourself, proving a point?" He looked at her, really looked, saw the exhaustion in her face, the fear, the grief she'd been carrying since David died, compounded now by the terror of losing her husband, too. "I promised David," he whispered. "And you kept that promise. The aircraft exists. It's flying combat missions. It's saving lives. But David wouldn't want you dead. I don't want you dead. Please, Nate, come back to me." He squeezed her hand, nodded weakly. "I'll rest. I promise. When production reaches 500 aircraft, I'll step back. Let others handle it." It was a compromise. Not the complete rest the doctor ordered, but better than nothing. Production expanded through late 1942 and into 1943. Dispersed workshops across Southern California. Furniture factories converting to aircraft production. Boat builders applying marine lamination techniques to fuselage construction. Piano manufacturers achieving the precision required for wing assembly. The dispersed production network proved genius. In April 1943, Japanese saboteurs managed to bomb Hartwell Aviation's main facility, destroyed 40% of the factory, killed 11 workers, crippled conventional production. But Phantom production continued without interruption. The furniture factory workshops, the church basement assembly areas, the dispersed network that Nate had designed specifically to survive such attacks. They kept building. By mid-1943, Phantom production reached 400 aircraft monthly. Combat results validated everything Nate had argued. Fighter Phantoms achieve kill ratios exceeding 5-1. For every Phantom lost, 5 enemy aircraft were destroyed. The speed advantage proved decisive. Japanese fighters couldn't catch them. German fighters couldn't intercept them. Bomber Phantoms achieved loss rates below 1%. They struck targets in daylight with precision impossible for night bombers, flew too fast for flak to track, too maneuverable for fighters to catch, and the battle damage assessments proved the final vindication. March 10, 1944, Pacific Theater. Captain Michael Torres flew his Phantom fighter at 12,000 feet, escorting bombers to Rabaul. The formation droned through tropical sky. Then the flak started. Japanese 88mm anti-aircraft guns, black puffs blooming around them. Torres jinked left, right, up, down. The Phantom responded like a dream. Light, fast, agile. Then one burst exploded close. Too close. Wham! The aircraft shuddered. Torres felt it in his bones. Something was wrong. He looked right. The starboard fuselage had a hole, not a small hole, a 3-foot hole where a 20mm shell had torn completely through. wooden splinters flying in the slipstream, fabric torn, structure exposed. In a metal aircraft, this was death. The aluminium skin would crack, peel back, structural failure within seconds, spin, crash, grave. Torres waited for it, waited for the aircraft to come apart. It didn't. The wooden structure flexed. The laminated plywood layers absorbed the impact. The hole existed, but the structure around it held. He tested the controls. Everything responded. Tower, this is Phantom 47. I've taken significant damage. 3-foot hole in starboard fuselage. Maintaining control, returning to base. 47, can you maintain altitude? Torres checked. Airspeed steady, altitude holding. Affirmative. Aircraft is flying normally despite damage. He flew 200 miles back to base, the hole whistling like a wound, the wooden structure holding like it was built for this. When he landed, the ground crew surrounded the aircraft, stared at the damage. "How the hell are you alive?" the crew chief whispered. Torres climbed out, looked at the hole, looked at the wooden structure that should have failed, but didn't. "Wood," he said. "The obsolete material saved my life." They sent photographs to Hartwell Aviation. Engineers examined them, stunned. In metal aircraft, 20mm shells caused catastrophic structural failure. The rigid aluminum couldn't absorb the impact. It cracked, propagated, failed. But wood flexed. The laminated layers distributed the load. The hole existed, but didn't spread. The structure compensated. The obsolete material proved superior for battle-damage survival. One engineer wrote in his report, "Conventional wisdom states that wood is inferior to metal for combat aircraft. Conventional wisdom is wrong. Wood's flexibility provides damage tolerance impossible with rigid metal structures. Caldwell's backward design is actually more survivable than modern metal construction." That report reached Nate 3 days later. He read it, then showed it to Maggie. "They called it obsolete," he said quietly. "Turns out obsolete means better than what we're using." "You were right." David was right. He always said sometimes old ways work better than new ones. I just listened to my son. German intelligence reports, captured later, revealed the enemy's frustration. They developed the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter, partly in response to the Phantom. America's wooden aircraft had forced Germany to accelerate their most advanced technology program. A mechanic from San Diego had changed the course of aerial warfare development. By December 1944, production reached 7,911 Phantoms, fighter variants, bomber variants, night fighter variants with radar, photo reconnaissance variants, strike variants for anti-shipping missions. No other aircraft in any air force matched this versatility, and throughout it all, workers in the dispersed factories maintained a secret tradition. Inside each cockpit, hidden where pilots would see it, but inspectors wouldn't notice, they engraved 2 letters, D.C., David Caldwell, the son whose death had inspired an aircraft, the ghost who flew in every Phantom, the boy whose father had refused to let his sacrifice be meaningless. One pilot, after completing 50 missions, wrote to Nate, "Sir, I just realized what DC means. I've been flying with your son for 6 months. He's brought me home every time. Please know that he's saving lives every day, not just mine, everyone who flies these aircraft. Your son is the most successful pilot in the war, and he's doing it from beyond the grave." Nate read that letter in December 1944, 2 years after his heart attack. He'd kept his promise to Maggie, mostly, had stepped back from daily production, let others handle quality control, spent time at home, took his medication, tried to heal. But he still visited the factories sometimes, still inspected random aircraft, still felt responsible for every rivet, every joint, every piece of wood that might mean life or death for American boys. Standing in the furniture factory that had built his 2000th Phantom, Nate watched workers installing the last instruments, saw one worker carefully engraving DC inside the cockpit rim. The worker noticed him watching, looked embarrassed. "Sorry, Mr. Caldwell, I know we're not supposed to add unauthorized markings, but—" "Don't apologize," Nate said quietly. "That's the most important part of the aircraft." He reached out, touched the engraving, felt the letters under his fingertips. Somewhere, somehow, David was still flying, still saving the boys who came after him, still making his father's obsession, his mother's grief, his own death mean something. Nate left the factory as the sun set over California, drove home to Maggie, found her in the kitchen making dinner like she had for 20 years. She saw his face, knew immediately he'd been to the factory again. "You promised you'd rest." "I know. But Maggie, they're engraving David's initials in every aircraft, all of them, thousands of aircraft carrying our son into combat." She started crying, not from grief this time, from something else. Pride, maybe, or relief that David's death had created something larger than loss. Nate held her in their kitchen while dinner grew cold. Two people who'd lost everything and found purpose in that loss. Two people who'd turned grief into aircraft, who changed a war through refusal to accept that experts knew best. "Do you think he knows?" Maggie whispered. "Wherever he is, do you think David knows what came from his death?" "I think he's flying every one of those aircraft," Nate said. "I think he's bringing those boys home. I think he's the best pilot in the war." Outside, California night fell over a nation at war. In factories across the state, workers built wooden aircraft that shouldn't work but did. In the Pacific and Europe, pilots flew those aircraft faster than physics said wood should fly. And in a small house in San Diego, two parents who'd buried their only son found peace in knowing his death had saved 10,000 lives. The war was turning. The phantoms were proving everything. But the hardest part was still coming. July 16, 1944. The War Department held a press conference in Washington. 50 journalists, newsreel cameras, flashbulbs popping like artillery. Colonel Raymond Blackwood stood at the podium in full dress uniform, medals glinting, expression confident. Behind him, charts showing phantom production numbers, combat statistics, kill ratios that defied conventional wisdom. "Gentlemen of the press," Blackwood began, "I'm pleased to announce the remarkable success of the War Department's innovative Phantom aircraft program. Through visionary leadership and bold procurement decisions, we've developed the most effective combat aircraft of the war." In San Diego, Nathaniel Caldwell listened to the broadcast on his workshop radio. "The Phantom represents a triumph of military innovation," Blackwood continued. "Early in 1940, our procurement board recognized the potential for alternative construction methods and high-speed designs. Despite skepticism from conventional thinkers, we authorized development and provided resources for this groundbreaking program." Nate's hands stopped moving. He'd been sanding a wooden chair. His therapy now, doctor's orders, keep the hands busy with simple work that didn't raise blood pressure. "We?" he said to the empty workshop. "We authorized?" "The success speaks for itself," Blackwood was saying. 7,000 aircraft produced, loss rates below 1%, combat effectiveness exceeding all projections. This program demonstrates the War Department's commitment to innovation and strategic thinking. Not one mention of Nathaniel Caldwell, not one word about a mechanic's unauthorized proposal, not one acknowledgement of the congressional hearing, the investigation, the battle against doctrine. History was being rewritten in real time. Nate turned off the radio, sat in silence, felt something that wasn't quite anger, more like acceptance. Of course they'd do this. Of course powerful men would claim credit. That's what powerful men did. Maggie found him an hour later, still sitting in the workshop. "You heard," she said. "I heard." "Nate, you need to fight this. Call the newspapers. Tell them the truth." Blackwood just stole. What did he steal? Credit? Recognition? Nate looked at his wife. "David's still dead, Maggie. Whether Blackwood claims credit or I get a medal, our son is still in the ground." "But you built this. You fought them. You nearly died. And 10,000 boys didn't die. That's what matters. You're really going to let him get away with this?" Nate stood, walked to the window overlooking his small yard. Suburban California. Modest house, modest life. Nothing grand or glorious. Blackwood needs the credit because without it, he's nothing. His entire identity is rank and recognition. But me? I'm David's father. That's my identity. and David's in every one of those aircraft, whether Blackwood admits it or not. The next day, Conrad Hartwell called. The company founder, now 72, furious about the press conference. "Nate, we're suing. Intellectual property theft. I've got lawyers ready to destroy Blackwood's career." Don't. He just claimed credit for your work. Conrad, lawsuits take years, cost money, distract from production. While we fight over credit, how many boys fly missions? How many come home because we're building phantoms instead of filing motions? I can't believe The aircraft fly. Boys come home. That's all that matters. Conrad was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're either a saint or a fool, Nate." "Neither. I'm just tired, and I've got more important things to do than fight over my name in a history book." But Sterling Whitmore wasn't as forgiving. The general appeared at Nate's workshop 3 days after the press conference, drove himself from Washington in civilian clothes, looked older than his 52 years. The war had aged everyone. "Nate, I can destroy him," Whitmore said without preamble. "One testimony before Congress. I have documentation proving Blackwood rejected the proposal, fought the program, tried to kill it at every stage. I can expose him, ruin his career." Nate kept working on his chair, sanding, smoothing, simple work that didn't require thinking. "And what happens after you destroy him?" "Then you get the recognition you deserve. Then history knows the truth." "Sterling, I appreciate what you're offering, but think about what happens next. You testify. Blackwood gets humiliated. The War Department looks incompetent. Public confidence in military leadership drops. And we're in the middle of a war." He set down the sandpaper. "I'd rather have effective leadership that stole my credit than incompetent leadership that gave me a medal. Boys are still dying out there. They need the War Department focused on winning, not defending itself from scandal." "You're serious?" "Completely." Nate looked at him. "Peter died because the system was broken. We fixed part of that system with the Phantom, but the system still has to function to win this war. Destroying Blackwood might feel good, but it won't bring Peter back, won't bring David back, won't save one more life." Whitmore sat down heavily. "When you die, history will say Blackwood built the Phantom. When I die, Sterling, I'll see my son again. That's the only history that matters to me." Whitmore left without another word. Nate heard his car pull away, kept sanding. The chair was nearly perfect now. Simple oak, strong joints, no wasted material. Beautiful in the way functional things are beautiful, like the Phantom. The war ended in August 1945. Nate was 46 years old, retired officially from Hartwell Aviation with a modest pension and no fanfare, no ceremonies, no medals, no recognition. The local newspaper ran a 2-sentence notice. "Nathaniel Caldwell retires after 28 years at Hartwell Aviation. The company wishes him well in his retirement." That was it. 28 years of building aircraft. 4 years of revolutionizing air combat, saving thousands of lives. 2 sentences. But on his last day, something unexpected happened. 47 pilots appeared at the factory. Phantom pilots from bases across the country. They'd coordinated secretly, traveled on their own dime, came to say thank you. Lieutenant Owen Fletcher, now Major, spoke for all of them. "Mr. Caldwell, we know what you did. We know what it cost you. And we want you to know that every one of us owes our lives to you. Not to the War Department, not to generals or colonels. To you, a mechanic who refused to accept that boys should die for doctrine." They presented him with a plaque, simple wood, appropriately wooden, with 47 names engraved. Every pilot present. Below their names, 1 sentence: "He built aircraft. We built families because of him." Nate couldn't speak, could only shake hands with each pilot, listen to their stories, the missions they'd flown, the times they'd outrun enemy fighters, the moments when speed had saved them and wood had absorbed damage that metal couldn't survive. "Your son flies with us," one pilot said. "Every mission. I've got DC engraved in my cockpit. Every time I climb in, I remember why that aircraft exists. Not for glory, not for credit, to bring boys home." That night, Nate showed Maggie the plaque. "This is what matters," he said. "Not Blackwood's press conferences, this." 1950 to 1963 passed quietly. Nate and Maggie lived modestly, traveled some, visited grandnieces and grandnephews. No grandchildren of their own. David had died too young. Watched America change. Watched the Cold War replace the Hot War. Watched jet aircraft replace propeller planes. The Phantom was retired from service in 1952. Obsolete now. Too slow for the jet age. Relegated to museums and scrapyards. But Nate didn't care. The aircraft had served its purpose, had saved the lives it was meant to save. His health declined gradually, the damaged heart weakening year by year. More medications, more doctor visits, more time sitting in his workshop building simple wooden furniture because his hands needed to work. In 1963, Conrad Hartwell published his memoir, 30 Years of Aviation Innovation. Expensive hardback, limited printing. Chapter 12 was titled The Phantom, One Mechanic's Dream. It told the true story: Nate's proposal, the rejection, the secret construction, the congressional battle, the vindication, and Blackwood's theft of credit. Conrad sent Nate an advance copy with a note. History should remember the truth. Maggie read the chapter aloud to Nate one evening. He was 64 now, weak, spending most days in his chair by the window, heart too damaged for much activity. When she finished reading, he smiled. That's kind of Conrad. But you know what? The truth doesn't need to be in books. It's in those 47 pilots who came to the factory. It's in the families they built. That's enough truth for me. Don't you want people to know? The people who matter already know. They sat together as California light faded. Two people who'd lost their only child and built something larger than grief. 1968. Winter. Nate was 69 years old. His heart was failing completely now. The doctors had stopped suggesting treatments. There weren't any. Just morphine for the pain. Just time counting down. He died on February 3rd, in his sleep, in his own bed, with Maggie holding his hand. She arranged a small funeral. Didn't expect many attendees. Nate had lived quietly, had few close friends. Most of his old co-workers from Hartwell were dead or scattered. But on the day of the funeral, something remarkable happened. 47 men arrived at the small church in San Diego. Some flew in from across the country. Some drove all night. All former Phantom pilots, the same ones who'd come to Nate's retirement 23 years earlier. They were older now, middle-aged, grey hair and expanding waistlines, but they came, every single one. Colonel Owen Fletcher, retired, spoke at the service. Nathaniel Caldwell never got a medal, never got recognition from the government whose doctrine he challenged, never got his name in the history books. But he got something better. He got to save our lives, and we got to build families because he refused to accept that his son's death should be meaningless. Every one of us flew with David Caldwell's initials in our cockpit. Every one of us came home because Nate Caldwell cared more about our lives than his career. History might not remember his name, but we do. Our children do. Our grandchildren do. There are thousands of people alive today, pilots, their wives, their children, who exist because a stubborn mechanic built an impossible aircraft. That's not credit. That's immortality. After the service, the pilots filed past Nate's casket. Each placed their flight wings on the lid. 47 sets of wings, silver glinting in the church light. He gave us these, one pilot said. Seemed right to give them back. At the cemetery, after the service, the 47 pilots stood at attention while they lowered Nathaniel Caldwell into the ground. Colonel Fletcher stepped forward, removed his wings, placed them on the casket. From all of us, sir, you gave us these. Time to give them back. One by one, the others followed. 47 sets of silver wings on polished wood. Maggie watched through tears. These men, these strangers, knew her husband better than the government that had stolen his credit. After everyone left, she stood alone at the grave. They came, Nate, she whispered. All 47, just like they promised. She placed her hand on the fresh earth. You saved them, everyone, and they never forgot. She left David's flight wings on the grave, father and son, together again. As she walked away, she didn't see the young airman who approached the grave an hour later. Couldn't have been more than 19, Army Air Force trainee. He stood at attention, saluted, spoke to the earth. Mr. Caldwell, sir, I'm Danny Morrison, Jack Morrison's grandson. My grandfather told me what you did, said you built the Phantom to save boys like me. I just wanted to say, I'm shipping out next month, flying F-4 Phantoms. They named the jet after your bird. He paused, swallowed hard. They told us about you in training. Mechanic who beat the system. I just wanted to say thank you for showing us that sometimes being right matters more than following orders. He saluted again, left. They buried Nathaniel Caldwell in a modest plot next to his son. The headstone was simple. Nathaniel Thomas Caldwell, 1899 to 1968. Beloved husband and father. No mention of aircraft, no mention of the war, no mention of 7,911 Phantoms or 10,000 lives saved, just husband and father. But if you looked closely at the base of the headstone, almost hidden by grass, someone had carved 2 letters, D.C. David Caldwell, the son who died, the son who lived on, the son whose initials flew in 7,000 aircraft and saved countless lives. Maggie died 18 months later. They buried her next to her husband and son. 3 graves in a row, a family reunited. Years passed. The Phantom faded from public memory. Jet aircraft dominated. The wooden wonder became a footnote, museum piece, curiosity from a simpler time. In 1986, the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum restored a Phantom for permanent display. Fighter variant, serial number HC-1847, chosen randomly from the few surviving airframes. They stripped it down, rebuilt it, made it pristine. Museum perfect. And inside the cockpit, the restoration crew found the engraving, D.C. They almost polished it away, almost removed it as non-original marking, but the crew chief stopped them. Leave it, that's part of the aircraft's history. The museum researched the letters, found the story, found Nate's congressional testimony, found the newspaper articles about the grieving mechanic, found Conrad Hartwell's memoir chapter. 1986, Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, dedication ceremony. The restored Phantom hung from the ceiling, wooden warrior preserved for eternity. Conrad Hartwell, 99 years old now, in a wheelchair, attended the dedication. This aircraft, the museum director said, represents one of World War II's most successful combat designs. 7,000 units produced. Loss rate below 1%. Kill ratio exceeding 5-to-1. He paused. But more than statistics, this aircraft represents the triumph of individual vision over institutional resistance. Nathaniel Caldwell, a mechanic without formal engineering training, designed this aircraft after the War Department rejected his proposal. He built it in secret, fought bureaucracy, nearly went to prison, and ultimately saved thousands of American lives. They unveiled the placard, the Phantom, designed against military doctrine, built from obsolete materials, proved speed matters more than armor, saved thousands of American lives. Development led by Nathaniel Caldwell. Chief Inspector, Hartwell Aviation, 1899 to 1968. Below the placard, in smaller text, every Phantom carried the initials D.C., David Caldwell, the son whose death inspired his father to revolutionize air combat. Conrad watched from his wheelchair, saw Nate's name finally acknowledged. About time, he muttered. After the ceremony, he wheeled himself to the viewing platform, looked inside the cockpit. D.C., still there, after all these years. You did it, Nate, Conrad whispered. They tried to erase you, tried to steal your credit, but here you are, in the museum, in history, where you always belonged. He reached out, touched the wooden fuselage one last time. Tell David we won. Tell him his initials flew in 7,000 aircraft. Tell him he saved them all. Conrad died 3 months later, age 99. They scattered his ashes over the Hartwell Aviation Factory site, now a shopping mall, history paved over. But the Phantom remains, wooden, silent, eternal. Present day, 2026. The The Smithsonian Phantom still hangs in the museum, still draws crowds, still tells its story. On a Tuesday afternoon, a young man stands before it, 26 years old, engineering student from Ohio State, working on his master's thesis about innovation in aerospace design. He reads the placard carefully, then climbs the platform to look inside the cockpit, sees the instruments, the controls, the wooden construction hidden under fabric and paint. And there, on the cockpit rim, barely visible, D.C. He takes a photograph, makes notes, thinks about his thesis, about how breakthrough innovations come from unexpected places, about how the most radical ideas often come from people who care more about results than recognition. His phone buzzes, text from his girlfriend, asking when he'll be done at the museum. He looks at the Phantom one more time, at the wooden aircraft that shouldn't have worked but saved thousands of lives. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," he whispers. The young man leaves the museum, goes home, starts his thesis. The title, Innovation Through Necessity: How Personal Loss Drives Technological Breakthrough. Chapter 1 begins with a mechanic named Nathaniel Caldwell, who lost his son and built an aircraft. In the museum, the Phantom hangs silent. Wooden skin smooth, lines sleek. 2 letters engraved where only those who look closely will see. D.C. Not just initials, a promise kept, a son immortalized. A legacy that needs no history book to matter. Somewhere in a San Diego cemetery, 3 graves sit side by side. Father, mother, son. Reunited in earth, if not in life. The headstone reads simply, Nathaniel Thomas Caldwell, 1899 to 1968, beloved husband and father. At the base, carved where grass nearly hides it, D.C. Fresh flowers rest against the stone, placed by the Phantom Pilots Veterans Association. 47 men who came home because one stubborn mechanic refused to accept that bureaucrats knew better than grief. The wooden warrior rests in museums now. War over, mission accomplished. But the story continues. In every engineer who challenges convention, in every father who fights for something larger than himself, in every person who learns that greatness isn't what the world says about you, it's what you leave behind that matters. 7,911 aircraft, 10,000 lives saved, 2 letters engraved where it matters. D.C. The wooden warrior's war is over, but his victory flies eternal.